A stranger happens to enter a small town of San Miguel. The town was ruled over by two most feared mafia groups fighting to maintain their dominance. They were unaware the man who has entered the town is not a tramp, but the actual next ruler of the town. Welcome back to Paramount Recapped. I don't have many subscribers, but your single comment is a ray of hope to motivate me.
Let him be.
The movie kicks off in a dusty little border town called San Miguel, perched right on the edge of Mexico and the US. In rolls Joe, a guy who's probably had more conversations with his horse than with people after a long ride. First thing he does? Heads for the well, because priorities. While Joe's chilling and sipping on some much-needed water, he spots a kid trying to sneak into a house. But before you can say, bad idea, a group of goons chase the poor kid away like he just tried to steal their last taco. The kid runs back to his dad, who looks like he's one stress away from a meltdown. A moment later, the same gang comes back and roughs up the dad. Inside the house, a woman named Marisol watches the whole mess unfold from a window. But the second things get too real, she shuts that window like she's trying to block out a bad reality show. Joe? He decides it's not his circus, not his monkeys, and keeps moving through town. As Joe rides through, he notices something strange. The place is quieter than a library on a Sunday morning. Everyone's hiding in their homes, and they're not exactly rolling out the welcome mat for this newcomer. Some folks even throw insults and fire off warning shots, basically saying, "We're all booked up here, pal. No vacancy." Joe eventually lands at a small inn run by an old guy named Svino, who doesn't seem too concerned that Joe's wallet is as empty as the town. Svino still offers him food, drinks, and a bed, which, let's be honest, is better customer service than most hotels. Over dinner, Svino spills the tea on the town's issues. Most of the men are dead, leaving a bunch of widows, and there's this nasty feud going on between Sheriff Baxter and the Rojo brothers. While out and about, Joe meets Pereiro, the local coffin maker, which, given the death rate around here, is probably the only thriving business. Joe, ever the opportunist, sees a way to make a quick buck by playing both sides in this feud. He shows he's not just talk by taking down four guys who thought insulting him was a good idea. Spoiler, it wasn't. Then, Joe turns to Pereiro and says, "Better start building some new coffins, buddy." Now, that's what you call job security. Later, Joe meets Don Miguel Rojo, who is so impressed by Joe's sharpshooting skills that he offers him a spot in his gang. Joe politely declines, probably because he's seen how these guys treat newcomers. Instead, he sticks with Svino and watches from the sidelines. One day, Joe and Svino spot some Mexican soldiers about to make a gold-for-weapons deal with the US military. Svino, who seems to know everything happening in this town, tells Joe about the chest of gold the soldiers are carrying. Joe's brain immediately goes into get-rich-quick mode. At the river, those Mexican soldiers get ambushed by what looks like US soldiers. But surprise! It's the Rojo brothers and their crew dressed up like they're going to a theme party. The whole thing is a scam to grab the gold. Joe, ever the sly one, waits until the coast is clear and then hatches a plan that's equal parts clever and ridiculous. He drags two dead Mexican soldiers to the cemetery and props them up like they're on some kind of grim coffee break, making it look like they somehow survived the massacre. Who says corpses can't be useful? Joe goes to the Rojo brothers and casually drops the bomb that two Mexican soldiers are still alive, chilling at the cemetery. The Rojo brothers, who thought they'd wiped everyone out, freak out like someone just told them their Netflix password got hacked. They rush over to finish the job, leaving Chico, one of their guys, to guard the loot back at the ranch. Meanwhile, Joe heads over to Sheriff Baxter and spills the beans about the Rojos' little gold-stealing scheme. He tells Baxter that while the Rojos took out the Mexican soldiers, two of them managed to escape and are hiding at the cemetery. Baxter's thrilled. Finally, a way to knock the Rojos down a peg. He drags his son Antonio along and rushes to the cemetery, thinking he's outsmarted everyone. Little does he know, he's just another pawn in Joe's game. As the chaos unfolds, Joe sneaks into the Rojo brothers' ranch, where Chico is supposed to be guarding the stolen gold. Joe knocks him out in about 2 seconds flat, finding the treasure. He's about to hightail it out of there with the loot when he hears footsteps. Ready for a fight, Joe braces himself, thinking thinking it's either Chico waking up or one of the Rojo brothers looking for trouble. But instead, it's Marisol. In the confusion, Joe accidentally knocks her out, which, let's be honest, isn't the smoothest way to make an introduction. After all the excitement dies down, Joe remembers the boy from earlier. That kid was Marisol's son, who had been looking for her. The Rojos had scared the poor kid away because Marisol was being held hostage by Ramon Rojo. Realizing what's going on, Joe decides to get Marisol to the Baxter family's place, figuring it's safer for her there and less risky for him. Plus, he needs to keep his plan to play both sides on track without anyone blowing his cover. Things hit the fan fast at the cemetery when the Rojo brothers clashed with the Baxter family. Amidst the chaos, Ramon killed the 2 dead Mexican soldiers that Joe had set up as a decoy. The Rojos managed to capture Antonio while they were in a firefight with the Baxters. But when they got home, Ramon freaked out after discovering Marisol was missing. His paranoia kicked in, thinking the Baxters had her, which was true since they offered to trade her for Antonio the next day. Both sides agreed to meet in town for the hostage exchange, and it was like the town's biggest event. Marisol's husband, Julio, and their son, Juanito, tried to save her, but Ramon ordered his men to take out Julio. Before things got ugly, Joe and Silvanito stepped in to stop Juanito from witnessing his dad get killed. Joe told Marisol to return to Ramon while Julio and Juanito were sent away. Definitely not the heartwarming reunion they hoped for. Joe had heard from Svino that Marisol was captured because Ramon threw a fit, accusing Julio of cheating in a card game. Later, the Rojo brothers invited Joe to celebrate their win. Joe, feeling bad for Marisol, wasn't in a party mood. Instead, he faked getting drunk, let himself be taken to a room to rest, then quietly took out the guards and rescued Marisol. To make it look like the Baxters had pulled off the rescue, he set the place on fire. Joe then reunited Marisol with Julio and Juanito, gave them some money, and told them to leave town before things got even more out of hand. It didn't take long for the Rojos to realize Joe was behind Marisol's escape, and they were furious. They caught him, beat him senseless, and tried to make him reveal where she was, but Joe stayed tight-lipped. They locked him up in a warehouse, but Joe wasn't about to give up. When Chico and a guard came to check on him, a barrel of liquor rolled their way, crashed into them, and killed them instantly. Despite being battered, Joe crawled out, determined to escape. Ramon and his crew heard the commotion and rushed in, but Joe had hidden near the door. As they charged in, he set the place on fire. Unfortunately, the Rojos managed to escape, but the fire spread fast. Ramon, in a panic, ordered his men to put out the flames while he headed to Silvanito's place, suspecting Joe would be hiding there. Joe overheard their plan and tried to warn Silvanito, but he was too late. Ramon and his thugs were already there, torturing Silvanito to make him talk. Silvanito, tough as nails, didn't give them any info. He didn't know where Joe was anyway. Joe, still recovering in the shadows, was too weak to help his friend. With no other choice, Joe asked Pereiro, the coffin maker, for help. Pereiro hid Joe in a coffin and smuggled him out of town. Meanwhile, the Rojos, convinced Joe was hiding with the Baxters, torched their home, and killed the entire family, including an unarmed woman, even though they had surrendered. Joe, still hiding in the coffin, saw the whole massacre unfold. The next day, Joe was holed up in an abandoned mine, nursing his injuries and practicing his shooting. He crafted a steel plate to test whether it could stop a bullet, knowing it would be his secret weapon against Ramon, who was infamous for his long-range shooting. Pereiro visited Joe, informing him that Silvanito had been captured and was being tortured. Even though Silvanito hadn't revealed anything, Joe knew it was time to step up and act. When Joe arrived, Ramon and his gang were in the middle of torturing Silvanito. Ramon, thinking Joe would eventually show up, was ready for him. As soon as Joe appeared, Ramon shot him and Joe hit the ground. Ramon, thinking he had finally won, was in for a shock when Joe got up like nothing had happened. Ramon, clearly rattled, fired again and again, but Joe didn't budge. Joe even taunted him to aim for his heart while slowly walking towards Silvanito. Out of bullets and frustrated, Ramon realized he was outmatched. That's when Joe revealed the steel plate under his poncho. With the surprise card played, Joe took out the men standing behind Ramon and with his last bullet, freed Silvanito. Then, Joe challenged Ramon to a final duel. Whoever reloaded first would win. Ramon lost, and Joe finished him off. Just when Joe thought it was over, Esteban Rojo, hiding in a nearby building, tried to take a cheap shot. Luckily, Silvanito spotted him and took him out before he could fire. The movie wraps up with Joe saying goodbye to Silvanito, hopping back on his horse and riding away, leaving behind a town finally at peace.